Texas. Summer, 1944. The air trembles with heat, a mirage over endless dust and barbed wire. A U.S. Army truck grinds to a halt outside Camp Hearn, one of hundreds of secretive POW sites scattered across America. The guards step out first, rifles slung low, sweat darkening their khaki uniforms. And then, the prisoners. Dozens of captured Germans stumble down from the trucks, blinking into the sunlight. Some still wear tattered Luftwaffe tunics. Others are in makeshift uniforms stitched from American Army blankets. They look like ghosts pulled from the ruins of Europe, men torn from firestorms and forced into silence. Among them, one man moves slower than the rest. He's not tall, not remarkable, just another weary face in a sea of defeat. His name is Heinrich Müller, a mechanic for Dresden who once fixed fighter engines for the Luftwaffe. But in his eyes, there's something different, a quiet alertness, as if he's watching the world for a shape he can still capture before it disappears. When the roll call ends, the guard barks an order. Inside, men. Keep moving. The prisoners file into the camp, wooden barracks lined up under a punishing sun. Behind the wire, the scent of cut grass mixes with motor oil from the repair shed. Somewhere, a harmonica plays a slow tune. It doesn't sound like surrender, more like someone remembering home. That night, while the others curse the heat or whisper about escape, Heinrich sits by a cracked wall in Barack 12. He runs a piece of charcoal between his fingers, a fragment he saved from a burnt log outside the kitchen. He presses it to the wall. A single line, then another. The outline of a face begins to emerge, soft, uncertain, alive. Within days, guards notice prisoners stopping before it. They don't speak. They just look, as if the wall now watches back. Weeks later, rumors spread beyond the fences. Some say the face is an angel. Others, a lost lover. Years later, tourists will still stand before that same wall, their cameras trembling as they whisper, "Who was the German girl?" But the real answer lies somewhere else, in the ashes of Dresden, in a letter that never reached its destination, and in the strange mercy found between enemies who refused to hate. Because behind that concrete wall was more than art. It was a confession and a memory that refused to die. When the first German POWs arrived in the United States in 1943, even the American guards didn't know what to expect. The newspapers called them Hitler's men, and citizens feared sabotage, violence, or worse. But what stepped off those transport ships wasn't an army of monsters. It was a generation of frightened young men. By 1944, more than 371,000 German prisoners had been scattered across America, tucked into rural farmlands, forgotten towns, and hastily built compounds like Camp Hearn in central Texas. Most Americans didn't even know the camps existed. They looked like ordinary military posts, but behind the fences, a quiet experiment in humanity was unfolding. The Geneva Convention required that POWs be treated with dignity. Food rations, clean clothes, medical care, even opportunities for education. And so, in the middle of wartime paranoia, these camps became something unimaginable, islands of civility inside a world gone mad. At Camp Hearn, guards soon noticed something peculiar. The prisoners were polite, disciplined even. They built gardens, crafted tools, and traded drawings for cigarettes. Some formed orchestras. Others built miniature German villages from scrap wood, complete with churches and clock towers. But beneath the calm surface, tension brewed. Inside the wire, not all Germans were the same. Some were diehard Nazis, still loyal to the Führer. Others were farmers, students, or mechanics like Heinrich, drafted, defeated, and quietly grateful to be alive. The ideological divide was invisible but sharp, slicing through friendships and conversations. In one corner of the camp, Heinrich fixed engines in the repair shed. His hands were skilled, patient, and methodical, built for creation, not destruction. He rarely spoke of the war. When others bragged about their service, he stayed silent. When propaganda officers shouted that the Reich would rise again, he only stared at the ground. Sometimes, at night, the men would gather to sing old folk songs, ones forbidden back home. It was in those moments that the fence around them seemed to fade, replaced by memory. The smell of bread in Dresden, the sound of bells on Sunday, the laughter of a woman named Latte. Heinrich would close his eyes and see her face, faint, like smoke from a candle. He promised himself he would never forget it. But what did it mean to remember beauty inside a prison? Could art survive among enemies, or was it a kind of betrayal? One afternoon, while repairing a generator near the kitchen, Heinrich overheard two guards talking. "They say these krauts behave better than our recruits," one chuckled. "Guess they're happy just not being shot at," the other replied. The men laughed, but the words lingered. Heinrich realized the strange truth. For many prisoners, captivity in America felt more humane than freedom under Hitler. There was food, order, even kindness. It was confusing, almost unbearable. That night, Heinrich returned to his barack and stared at the blank wall opposite his cot. The concrete was pitted and stained, but in the shadows he saw shapes, the curve of a cheek, the line of an eyelash. He felt the urge to draw, though he had no paper, no tools, no permission. Still, he began. Each mark was a rebellion, not against the guards, but against the idea that war could erase what made him human. Days passed. The prisoners noticed the lines taking form. Some mocked him at first. "What's next, Muller? Going to paint a castle too." But soon, the laughter stopped. The wall began to transform. One morning, sunlight slipped through a gap in the roof and illuminated the figure. A woman's face, serene yet sorrowful, as if she carried the weight of all their homes. The men grew quiet. Even the guards paused. Something about her expression, tender, almost forgiving, unsettled them. Who was she? A saint? A ghost? A memory? For Heinrich, the answer was simple. She was Latte, the woman he left behind when the sirens first wailed over Dresden. But he never said her name aloud. The wall became their secret. Weeks later, word spread through the camp. Men from other barracks came just to see the girl on the wall. Some prayed before her. Others left small carvings or scraps of poetry beneath her image. The guards could have ordered it painted over, but they didn't. Maybe they couldn't, because even they felt it, the strange, impossible warmth that lived inside cold concrete. Still, not everyone saw beauty. In the far corner of the compound, whispers began to rise about weakness, betrayal, degenerate art. Men loyal to the Reich called it blasphemy. They said Heinrich's drawing was proof that captivity had softened them, made them forget the cause. But how could remembering a face, a simple human face, be treason? The question haunted Heinrich as the Texas sun burned another day into the sky. And as shadows grew longer, so did the tension. Because beauty, in a place built for punishment, could be dangerous. The Texas wind never stopped. It rattled tin roofs, hissed through the barbed wire, and carried red dust that coated every surface, except one. The wall in Barack 12. Every morning before roll call, a few prisoners paused there, brushing the dust from her face with their sleeves. The drawing had deepened, lines sharpened into expression. Shadows made her eyes glisten in low light. She seemed to breathe. Heinrich hadn't meant for it to become anything sacred. It began as memory, not worship, but by the third week, men whispered as they passed. "She's watching over us." They started calling her Das Mädchen, the girl. One evening, a guard named Corporal Whitaker stopped at the doorway. "Who painted her?" he asked in a flat Texas drawl. No one answered. Then Heinrich stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I did." Whitaker looked at the wall for a long moment. "She looks sad." "She's waiting," Heinrich said quietly. Something shifted after that. The guards didn't order it erased. Maybe they couldn't bring themselves to. Instead, they began sneaking in to look. At night, you could hear boots crunching outside, the door creak, then silence, the kind of silence that only art can create. Soon the camp's energy changed. Men who had fought each other for scraps now argued over shading and proportions. One built a wooden frame around the mural to keep her safe. Another offered to make pigments from crushed brick and coffee grounds. What had begun as a sketch became a collective act of hope. Letters home described her in fragments. "We have a girl on our wall. She looks like peace. Tell Mother not to worry. An angel guards us here. The army censors allowed those lines through. Maybe they didn't see danger in them. But in Berlin, propaganda officers would have called it weakness, art instead of obedience. Heinrich kept working late into the night until the others slept. He would trace her outline again and again, terrified that if he stopped, she might fade. Sometimes he caught himself whispering, "Do you still remember me, Latte?" He didn't know that halfway across the Atlantic, Dresden was already turning to rubble. One dawn, as the siren sounded for roll call, sunlight struck the mural full on. The prisoners fell silent. The face glowed pale gold, like stained glass in a ruined cathedral. Even Whitaker lowered his voice. "Hell," he muttered, "she's got more life than any of us." But beauty breeds attention, and attention breeds envy. A small knot of hardliners have been watching, men who still greeted each other with the old salute when the guards weren't looking. They called themselves the true ones. To them, the mural wasn't hope, it was infection. They whispered that Heinrich had gone soft, poisoned by American kindness. One spat on the ground. "While the fatherland burns, he paints women." Heinrich ignored them, though every glance felt heavier. At night, he heard footsteps outside the barack, too deliberate to be wind. He kept drawing anyway, because to stop was to admit they'd already taken everything from him. Weeks later, a Red Cross inspector visited. Reports from Camp Hearn astonished Europe. Prisoners healthy, even smiling. American rations equal to soldiers. An orchestra performing Bach behind barbed wire. The inspector noted something else in his diary. A remarkable mural in one hut. Expression of faith and longing. Proof that civilization persists. The entry never made it to German newspapers. But in that single observation lay the contradiction of the entire war. Humanity surviving inside captivity. Freedom inside fences. And yet, nothing stays sacred in a place built for conflict. As summer deepened, tempers flared. News of Allied advances reached the camp. Normandy, Paris, the collapse of the Eastern Front. For the fanatics, it was unbearable. They began interrogating others. Who believed? Who doubted? Who worshipped the girl? Heinrich stayed silent, but silence can be dangerous when fear looks for targets. One night, the mural's guardians heard boots again, different this time. Heavier, purposeful. The door burst open, and a hiss of kerosene filled the air. The next morning, when the prisoners gathered, smoke stained the rafters. The wall was blackened, the face half gone, but her outline remained, a ghost in soot. Someone tried to burn her, and failed. The guards never found who did it. The camp pretended to move on. But from that day, every man who looked at the wall saw something new, defiance. Art had survived fire, and in war, that was almost unforgivable. What makes men destroy beauty they can't understand? And what keeps others rebuilding it, even when they know it'll burn again? The answers waited in the shadows of Barack 12, where hope and hate were about to collide. The mural's ashes still clung to the wall when the next morning sun cut through the slats. The smell of burned paint mixed with the sour tang of rationed soup. Some prisoners stood in silence. Others pretended nothing had happened. Heinrich sat on his cot, charcoal dust still under his fingernails, staring at what was left of her face. The left eye had survived the fire. It looked calm, almost forgiving, as if even flames couldn't make her angry. That frightened him more than rage ever could. "Why didn't they just let her be?" whispered a voice beside him. It was Franz, a teacher from Cologne. "Because they're afraid of things that don't obey," Heinrich murmured. The camp's rhythm went on, but something had cracked. The hardliners moved like shadows now, whispering, patrolling, marking the walls with chalk symbols at night. They called themselves Die Truhen, the faithful. They held secret meetings behind the laundry shed, passing messages on torn paper hidden in loaves of bread. Their leader was a tall, scar-faced man named Kurt Seidel, once an SS corporal. He had lost his brother in Normandy, and something inside him had hardened into stone. He preached that America's kindness was a trick, that the Red Cross visits and rations were poison meant to break their will. "They feed you so you'll forget who you are," he told the men. They give you paper, you write poems. They give you walls, you draw whores. Some cheered him. Others avoided his eyes. Inside the fences, a quiet civil war began. One night, Franz returned to the barack, bleeding from his mouth. They found a letter I wrote. He whispered. I told my wife the guards aren't monsters. They call me traitor. Heinrich sat with him till morning, both too afraid to speak. The Americans noticed tension, but misunderstood it. They thought the Germans were homesick. They couldn't see the invisible lines forming. The good Germans versus the loyal ones. The dreamers versus the believers. That week, Whitaker entered Barack 12 and stood before the half-burned mural. You gonna fix her? He asked quietly. Heinrich hesitated. Maybe some things shouldn't be rebuilt. Whitaker nodded slowly. Or maybe that's when they matter most. Then he turned and left, leaving the door swinging in the wind. That night, Heinrich took up the charcoal again. He worked in silence, tracing what he remembered. The curve of her cheek, the sorrow in her eyes. He redrew her exactly as before. But this time, her expression was different. Not gentle, defiant. The next morning, the men gasped. She wasn't the same girl. She was stronger, older, almost angry. Franz smiled faintly. She's looking right at them now, he said. Rumors spread fast. Some said the girl had returned to curse those who burned her. Others said she was the soul of every man who'd lost someone to the war. But to Heinrich, she was simply proof that memory can't be erased. Not by fire, not by fear. Seidel's men didn't see it that way. To them, this was open rebellion. A declaration. They couldn't allow a symbol of weakness to survive. One evening, they cornered Heinrich outside the kitchen, shoving him against the wall. Why do you keep drawing her? Seidel demanded. She reminds me of home. Seidel sneered. Home is gone. You'd rather dream of women than fight for your country. Heinrich looked at him and said softly, There's no country left to fight for. The words hung in the air like gunpowder. Seidel's fist connected with Heinrich's jaw. The guards didn't see. No one intervened. That night, Heinrich lay awake, blood on his pillow. He thought of Dresden, of Lotte's laughter echoing in the narrow streets, of smoke rising over rooftops that no longer existed. He realized he wasn't fighting Seidel anymore. He was fighting forgetting. Days later, Franz disappeared. The guard said he was transferred to another camp, but no one saw him leave. The men stopped talking in the mess hall. The laughter faded. The orchestra fell silent. Even the harmonica stopped. In its place came whispers, suspicion, fear. Every smile was weighed. Every word could be reported. The camp wasn't just a prison anymore. It was an echo of the Reich itself, shrinking, paranoid, devouring its own. But Barack 12 stood apart. The mural, half shadow, half light, became the last neutral ground. Men who hated each other stood side by side before it, silent. Some saw sin. Some saw salvation. All saw themselves. One morning, a guard found a note pinned beneath the girl's face. The handwriting was German, sharp and steady. If art is treason, then every heart that still feels is guilty. Heinrich never admitted writing it, but Whitaker suspected. He didn't say a word. Weeks later, orders came down. The war was nearly over. The Allies were advancing into Berlin. Hitler was dead. Germany was surrendering. The news hit Camp Herne like lightning through dry grass. Some prisoners wept. Others raged. Seidel vanished. Rumor said he'd taken his own life behind the laundry shed. And in the midst of it all, Heinrich stood once more before the wall, the air thick with dust and silence. The mural seemed different again, peaceful this time. He whispered to her, It's over. But peace is never that simple. When the gates finally opened, and the men began preparing to return to the ruins of their homeland, no one knew what waited beyond. The fences might vanish, but the war inside them would not. The news came not with cheers, but with silence. On a morning thick with humidity, the camp loudspeaker crackled to life. A voice read the message flatly, almost unbelieving. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. For a long moment, no one moved. The guards looked at the prisoners looked at the sky, and even the wind seemed to stop. It was as if the world itself didn't know what to do with peace. Then came a sound, Not shouts, not laughter, but a single muffled sob. One of the younger men dropped to his knees in the dust. Freedom. The word felt heavy, unfamiliar. For Heinrich, it was not a burst of joy. It was a quiet ache. He had spent nearly 2 years inside these fences, watching seasons turn and faces blur into one another. Now, suddenly, the gates would open, and he would return to what? Home. No, Dresden was gone. He knew it. He had read the fragments of letters smuggled in weeks earlier, stories of the firebombing, of streets melting, of a sky that burned for 2 nights straight. Lotte's name had never appeared in any of them. So he did what he always did when words failed. He went to the wall. The girl looked back at him, calm as ever. She had survived fire, hatred, and despair. The Americans were dismantling barracks now, packing crates, taking photographs for their records. Whitaker approached and stood beside Heinrich, hands on his belt. "She'll be gone soon," he said softly. Heinrich nodded. "So will I." Whitaker hesitated, then pulled a folded photograph from his pocket. A black and white snapshot of the mural. "Figured she deserved to live somewhere else too," he said, handing it over. Heinrich stared at it, realizing what that simple act meant. Acknowledgement. Respect. The kind of kindness that required no permission. A week later, the trucks arrived. Rows of prisoners lined up for repatriation. Some sang, others cried. Many refused to look back. But Heinrich lingered, standing in the doorway of Barack 12-1 last time. He walked up to the wall, knelt, and pulled out a nail. Beneath the girl's image, in small carved letters, he wrote, "For Lotte, bis wir uns wiedersehen." For Lotte, until we meet again. He pressed his palm against the wall, leaving a faint mark of charcoal. Then he turned, walked through the gate, and disappeared into the dust. No one in Camp Hearn ever saw him again. For years, the site lay abandoned. The barracks rotted. Vines crawled up the wooden frames. Locals tore down fences, repurposed lumber, planted crops over the foundations. By the 1950s, the land looked like any other Texas field. Empty, unremarkable, silent. Then, in 1982, a group of students from a nearby university began excavating what remained of the old POW camp. They were expecting rusted nails and broken bottles. What they found stopped them cold. Beneath layers of dirt and plaster, one wall still stood, solid, cracked but intact, and faintly visible under the grime, a face. A woman's face. The students thought it was a trick of the light. But as they cleaned away the years, the lines reappeared, soft, human, hauntingly alive. Her eyes looked out from history itself, calm and forgiving, just as she had decades before. Word spread fast. Local papers ran headlines. Mysterious mural found at former POW camp. Tourists arrived. Historians searched archives. No one could find Heinrich Muller's full records. The Army's paperwork listed him as repatriated, unaccounted. No address. No further trace. But some clues emerged. A photo from 1946 showed a German man helping rebuild homes in Dresden. Same build, same eyes. A Red Cross file mentioned a former mechanic who volunteered to repair orphanage roofs. Then nothing, as if he had melted back into the ruins of history. Still, the wall remained. Locals built a small museum around it to protect it from weather. Visitors said the face seemed to change with the sun, mournful at dawn, hopeful at dusk. Couples left flowers beneath her image. Veterans bowed their heads. One elderly man who had served as a camp guard returned in 1987. Standing before the wall, his hands trembled. "She looks the same," he whispered, "just older like the rest of us." And so the legend grew. Was she Lotte, a saint, or just the last breath of humanity in a place meant to erase it? No one knew, but every person who looked at her felt the same strange pull, a sense that she was waiting for someone, somewhere, still. Maybe for Heinrich, maybe for us, because some art isn't meant to be owned. It's meant to remind. The Camp Hearn Museum sits quiet now, a patch of earth framed by chain-link fences and oak trees that whisper when the wind turns warm. Inside, the air smells faintly of dust, paint, and old wood. And at the far end of the hall, behind a pane of glass, the wall still stands. She's there, the girl. Her eyes follow you as you move closer. Not haunting, just knowing. She's smaller than you imagined, drawn in the rough texture of concrete, weathered by decades of Texas heat. But she's still here. Every year, thousands visit. School groups, veterans, travelers chasing forgotten corners of World War II. Some stare in silence. Others whisper questions. Who is she? Why did he draw her? Did he ever find her again? No one has answers, only fragments. Historians piece together that Heinrich was one of the thousands repatriated in 1946, likely to a city no longer standing. Dresden's records show hundreds of missing civilians, and among them, a woman named Charlotte Meissner, Lotte, listed as presumed dead. No photographs, no grave, just a name and a date. And yet, somehow, she lived through him, through the wall, through time itself. A retired archivist once said, "That mural is the closest thing we have to a love letter that survived the war." He wasn't wrong, because what Heinrich created wasn't just art. It was an act of defiance, a declaration that the human soul, even in captivity, refuses to be owned. When visitors stand before the wall today, something quiet happens. Conversations slow. The air shifts. People sense it. That ghost of compassion in a place built for hate. They see more than lines and shading. They see forgiveness. One veteran, who had fought in Europe and lost friends at Bastogne, visited in 1992. He stood before the mural for nearly 10 minutes without speaking. Then he said softly, "If this was the enemy, maybe we never really knew who we were fighting." That's the contradiction the war never solved. The realization that enemies can share the same grief, the same longing, the same capacity for beauty. The museum. Curator tells stories now to anyone who asks. Sometimes, she says, you'll see light catch her face just right, and it's like she smiles. People leave notes, letters, pieces of their own memories. One reads, "My grandfather was a guard here. He used to say the German with the charcoal had kinder eyes than anyone he'd ever met." Another, "She reminds me of someone I lost." Maybe that's the point. As the years pass, the mural ages. Cracks spider through the plaster. Conservationists patch what they can, but even they admit time will win. One day, the image will fade for good. But maybe that's how it should be. Not erased, just carried forward, one story at a time. Because the real legacy of Camp Hearn isn't the fence, the barracks, or even the wall. It's the proof that, even in the middle of war, some men chose creation over destruction. Heinrich's mural became a message across generations. That compassion is not weakness, that beauty is not surrender, and that memory, even one drawn in charcoal, can outlive an empire. And if you listen closely inside that museum, when the lights go dim and the last visitors have left, you might swear you can still hear it. The faint scratch of charcoal on concrete. The whisper of a name spoken to no one. Lotte, a ghost who never left. A love that refused to burn. And a reminder that sometimes the most powerful battles of World War II weren't fought with guns, but with the fragile persistence of the human heart. Some stories of war are written in blood. Others, in charcoal on a forgotten wall. If this one moved you, stay with us for the next untold chapter of WWII's Hidden Humanity. Because history still whispers, even through cracked concrete.